Welcome back. In this unit, we'll take a quick look at what the SimpleGame engine can do for you and get some ideas about how you can start using it to build your games. We'll be using this for the rest of the course, so you'll really want to get comfortable with it and get a sense of how to use it for your own games. Well, obviously it's useful to have a library, and there's lots and lots of libraries out there. So you might be wondering, why create another one? Why not use one of the ones that's already available? Well, and the answer for this is quite simple. As I was looking through the libraries to use, there are many excellent libraries out there, and they're all optimized for different things. Some are designed to give you the very best performance. Some are designed to be as useful as possible on particular devices. But none that I could find was really designed to be extremely easy to teach and learn. And that was the primary thing I was looking for. I want to have an engine that is very straightforward and easy to understand so that you can get making really great games as soon as possible. Of course, I want the performance to be decent enough that you can build good games, but it was more important that it's very easy to follow and very easy to use. It turns out that even if it is easy to use and easy to understand, it's got pretty decent performance. We've actually made some commercial level games on it. So I don't think we're really compromising too much. Let's take a look at how this game works. At the moment, I'm showing you the main screen for my book, just because this is always going to be a good place to find whatever the latest version of that library is. I'll always have a link here. I'll also try to keep the link on the Udemy site up to date. And you can see at the bottom of the main page for the book, and this is the main page for the book, there is a link to the SimpleGame.js file. This is a JavaScript file. It's just an external JavaScript file. Now, as you look at it, holy cow, there's a lot here. Yeah, all the things I don't want you to have to worry about right now are in this file. That way, I've done a lot of the programming for you, so you don't have to worry about how to do all of these things. It's just your job to understand how it works so that you can come back and have a lot of fun with it. There's quite a bit of math, there's quite a bit of other kinds of things going on under the scenes that I'd love for you to learn about. Towards the end of the class, we'll break into this code and look at those details. But you don't have to understand all of the details in order to write a good game. So for now, the idea is, well, let's take this game and let's be able to use the engine to build whatever we want. Now, the key thing to understand here is actually this address right here. So SimpleGame, at the moment, it's 10.js. If indeed it's changed, I'll try to make it always backwards compatible. You may see something different. Now, in order to use SimpleGame, all you do is come to this site or the site I give you on Udemy and right-click it, save link as, and save it someplace on your machine. I would say save it in the same directories where you're making your pages, or save it to the desktop if you wish, as SimpleGame. If you change the name a little bit, that's fine. Just make sure you're keeping track of what it is. This one's called SimpleGame 10.js. To be consistent with the examples, I'm just going to go ahead and change this to SimpleGame.js. So the examples will work exactly the same. And there we go. We're ready to go. As long as you have this file in whatever directory you're creating your own web pages, you'll be able to use it. That's neat, isn't it? Yes, it is. And this will work the same if you're on Windows, Mac, Linux. It all works pretty much the same. Now, what does the SimpleGame library do for us? Well, let me show you. The strategy here was to make a library that's very easy to learn and very easy to use. A lot of game libraries have tons and tons and tons of features, but you can get lost in them. And so we're going to keep it as simple as possible. I really have two main object types in this game, and you've already met them both. The scene, which encapsulates the overall gameplay functionality, and the sprite, which is the thing that all of the various game objects tend to be made of. So that's all that you really have. There's a few other objects you'll see soon, but they're mainly used for special purposes. Mobile development, audio, and so on. So the main idea was this ease of learning. I want it to be as easy to learn as possible because game programming gets complicated. I want to hide complexity. There's some really interesting things going on here that HTML doesn't really give you. Collision detection, sound effects, an idea called vector projection, which allows us to produce motion from distance and speed. That was important. I wanted it to work on lots of platforms. So it works on pretty much any desktop browser as long as you've got a halfway modern browser. And it also works pretty well on mobile devices, including Android and iOS devices. It's mobile friendly. So we decided to make it as useful as possible on mobile devices so it can handle touch screen and tilt interface. We want it to be reasonably powerful. Well, this library does perform about as well as many mobile and web platforms. It actually performs better than Flash, at least according to some tests I've done. I rewrote some of my Flash games using this and found that I was not compromising performance at all. We're using a methodology called object-oriented programming. We've already sort of introduced that a little bit through ordinary web development. You know, a div is an object and a text element and a button. But we're going to learn more about object-oriented programming. You're going to be building your own objects. So this is a really powerful idea. All the main features are an object, and you can make your own types of objects. Objects have properties and methods. It's really cool. Another really important thing about this engine is that it's free and open source. You're welcome to take this library and use it for whatever purpose you want. You can make your own games with it. You can modify it, add new things. It's yours. Have fun with it. And so far, the community has done some really nice things. I'd love to share some of the great things that people have been doing to improve it even more. And I intend to always keep it free and open source. So there you go. Well, let's take a quick look at the main elements of this library. There's really two main objects, as I said before. The scene object, well, that actually creates a canvas and sets up the update function to run 20 times per second. You're typically going to make the scene as a part of your init function, and then you'll start the scene as the end of the init function. You can look over here, and here's a few characteristics of the scene. Obviously, this may not matter yet. We'll look at these things as we need them. The scene has methods. It's things that it can do. It can start, it can clear, it can stop. We can set its size and position and so on. It's okay if you're not quite sure what all this stuff means yet. The idea right now is to know, okay, the scene is a powerful thing. I might really want to learn some of these things. The other important class is the sprite class. The sprite class is really interesting. I already explained a little bit how you create it. You need to have a scene. You give it the name of an image file, an initial width, and initial height. The sprite has some properties, characteristics. It's canvas, width, height, x, y, dx, dy. You look at these properties to figure out what's going on currently with the sprite. We also have all kinds of methods, which are things that the sprite can do. We can change its image, we can update it, we can hide it, show it, report, and so on. The sprite has a lot of motion methods, because the main thing that we do with sprites, well, is move them around. Again, don't memorize these. I'll show them to you as we need them. This is just the documentation so you'll know where to look things up if you want to. And of course, I'll have the documentation linked on the Udemy main site. So here's all the very interesting things that we can do about motion. We also can do some interesting things with boundaries. A thing about something that moves, you know, if you have small children or pets, you're like, oh, I can't wait for it to move, and then once it can move, where'd it go? The moment that something can move, it runs out of bounds. And that happens with our sprites as well. So there's 5 main ways to handle boundary behavior with sprites. The great thing about our sprites is they know all 5 of those. So we can tell it what to do when it leaves the screen. Should we wrap, bounce, stop, die, or continue? And in fact, we have the ability to have more special behavior in those cases where we want it to, say, bounce off the top and bottom but scroll off the sides. A Pong game would do that, for example. Collision is one of the most exciting things that happens in games, and so the sprite object has a number of techniques for telling how close 2 things are to each other and whether they're currently touching. We'll talk a lot more about this later on, actually in the next main unit. And so collides with, distance to, angle to, this helps us to know if 2 things are touching, and if not, how far they are and what direction they are from each other. We also have some interesting abilities to do sprite sheet animations. That's pretty interesting. That allows us to have many, many images, and we swap between them to get some nice animation behavior. There's a few other objects we have besides the sprite and the scene, and they allow us to do other interesting things. We have a sound object, which allows us to encapsulate audio. So this is a pretty handy thing. We can encapsulate an audio element and be able to play it back. We also have a timer object, which is useful in certain circumstances for figuring out how long since a particular event happened. One really interesting thing we have is what's called a virtual joystick, and this allows us to use the touch screen on mobile devices as a joystick. That's a pretty useful thing. That way you can have mobile games that will still work if you don't have a keyboard with arrow keys. We also can read tilt interface from a mobile device, so as we're tilting it, we can read that as an input element. That's kind of nice. We don't need it yet. In Chapter 9, we'll look more at that sort of thing. And we also have an interesting element called the game button, which is just a very easy way for us to add button behavior, so that if you need to put a button on your page, especially in mobile devices where there's no keyboard, it's quite easy to do so. And finally, we have a special thing called a keyboard array that helps us keep track of what key is being pressed for keyboard input on a standard keyboard. And early on, we'll do most of our work on a standard desktop keyboard because that's probably the easiest input mechanism to use. So this is what we'll be doing for keyboard. Okay, that, believe it or not, is the entire documentation for this engine. Again, you don't have to memorize it. What we'll do is, as we're doing more and more powerful things, we'll come back and look at how all these things work. That's pretty neat, isn't it? Yeah, I want to show you one more really nice thing that I'll link to with this video, and that is basically a template. So as I run this, it doesn't look very interesting because it doesn't do anything. But you might want to bookmark this particular page or save a copy of it. What this is a basic template you can use for your games. And so every game using the SimpleGame library will begin just like this. So it will have ordinary HTML starting place. It'll import the SimpleGame library, and then you'll make your own JavaScript element that has a scene and whatever sprites you want. The scene always begins with new scene. So in it, the first thing we do is create a new scene, and then we'll create each of our sprites. Typically, you don't want to call it Sprite 1. Give it a name that means something. I just wanted to show you how to build a sprite. And then at the last part of init should start the scene. You'll always have an update function, which always begins with clearing the scene. Any sort of events or special circumstances that happen, we'll put in the middle of the update function. And then at the end of the update function, we update each of the sprites. So we tell each of the sprites, hey, go do your thing. Does that make sense? Yes, it does. It makes lots of sense. And so that is the basic template. If you want, you could copy this, paste it, put it in your text editor, and every time you want to begin building a game or an animation, you can start with this code. Of course, it's simple enough you should learn how to write it yourself. I'm not big on memorization, but it is good to know how to do this so that you're not reliant on having to copy and paste from somewhere else. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so next time we're going to look at something a little more elaborate. How do we get user input and turn this from being an animation into being a game? I know. Yeah, we're moving right along. All right, I'll see you then.